So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's session on the Procurement Act 2023 and innovative curbside EV charging solutions. I'm Shamala Gadgil, Chair of the Electric Vehicle Charging Infrastructure Working Group at TTF. Now, this webinar brings together a timely intersection of topics: how we procure new technologies under the updated legislation, and how those technologies, particularly in the EV charging space, are evolving to meet the needs of our streets and communities. But before we move on to the main sessions, we will start with a short introduction from John Loyne, who will provide some important context around cybersecurity considerations. It is critical, often overlooked aspect of deploying or using this in the connected infrastructure space. After that, Steve Sopp from Crown Commercial Services will take us through the key changes brought about by the Procurement Act 2023 and what this means for local authorities and delivery partners. We will then hear from Martin Walters from Rheinmetall and Shane Rees from Chargy, who will share their approaches to curbside charging, particularly for areas with constrained urban environments and limited off-street parking. And then we'll close the panel Q&A session. So please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A tab that should be right on the top as we go along. Again, I don't think that we've got the facility to raise hands and actually speak here. So please extensively use the Q&A. And thank you again for joining us. John, over to you.
Thanks, Shamala. Let's see if I can get this to work. There we go. So I assume you can all see that, but because I can't see any of you, I don't actually know if you can or not. So I will assume that you can, and I will carry on. So just wanted to give a quick update on the cybersecurity landscape. If any of you were at the previous event that we ran, the in-person event, I gave a bigger update then. So this is just a carry on from there, really. So I like this little story. It tells a really good story of cybersecurity and why it's important. So I just wanted to bring this one to the forefront. It's quite an old story now, but if you do Google it, it's an actual story. So this is an IoT connected fish tank. The designer decided that he didn't want to keep visiting the place to check the water temperature, check the quality, etc., etc. So connected it to the internet. And used a cloud service to monitor it remotely, only visiting site as needed. Great idea. And their attitude towards cybersecurity was, well, who wants to attack a fish tank? So you put that fish tank in a casino, it becomes suddenly very interesting. So the casino got hacked via the fish tank and the high roller database was stolen. And if you can see the date on there, it's quite an old story now, from 2018, but it just goes to show that it's been a problem for a long time and nobody really pays a great deal of attention to it. So whenever I get the opportunity to talk about cybersecurity, that's exactly what I do. Little bit about EV charging infrastructure. There's lots of horror stories around. Most of them are what ifs as opposed to actual stories, but there are a few in there that are real. Quishing seems to have disappeared a bit now because people are a bit more aware of it. Quishing is where there is a fake QR code stuck over the top of the actual QR code. We used to see that quite a lot a few years back, but people are getting a bit smarter now and checking QR codes and things like that. And when I'm out and about EV charging, have an app that asks me to do various tasks while I'm at EV chargers. One of those tasks, typically on Ionity, is to check the QR codes to make sure they've not been tampered with, which is quite an interesting thing to do. Although I do look a bit strange wandering around taking photographs of chargers while somebody's trying to start a charge on them, but that's a different story. So what are the risks when it comes to EV charging? What could a compromised EV charger or infrastructure, what could that look like? So, we can see things like customer details stolen. I've already talked about the QR code, or the quishing as it's known. Payment information, failed charging, which is frustrating for the driver. Downtime, which is frustrating for the CPO and the driver. And in extreme cases, we could potentially see massive power outages where the chargers are turned off and on and off and on en masse, which then could potentially overload the local substation or even the national grid. There's plenty of things around to check security. We use a lot of different things online because there's no point testing against the same thing over and over again, because if you're protected against that, then there's always something new. So there's a couple of pictures on the screen that show some of the tools that we use for testing security. Shodan is a really interesting one. If any of you have heard me talk before, I'll have talked about Shodan and probably used this example, where I used Shodan to have a quick look around the internet for OCPP connected devices, and it showed me this unsecured connection, which was very easy then to work out what the default username and password was for the device. Hackers are constantly evolving. There's always a new threat, a new risk, a new firmware version, software update, legislation, guidance. There's always something new coming at us. Only recently we saw Cisco announced 9.9 out of 10 vulnerability on their firewalls. Needless to say, we were patching within hours of that vulnerability being announced, because as they announced it, they brought a firmware out to protect against. So these things are constantly happening and constantly changing. So there's some good guidance and legislation coming out of government. We'll talk a little bit about some of this maybe later. But there's the Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill coming 2027-ish. There's lots of information online if you want to read up on that. I'm not going to spend hours talking about that. That's a webinar all by itself. And then end-to-end security. REA have brought out a document which I'll talk about in a second, that talks about end-to-end security, anomaly detection, ongoing threat monitoring, different standards, the RED and the EN 303645, PCI compliance, which is a payment card industry standard, Cyber Essentials Plus, which is a government-backed standard, and they want to see embedded security in the design, put in from the start, not something added on later. And it goes down to supply chain. So, if you're a local authority and you're doing a procurement exercise, that's the time to start asking about cybersecurity. Check certifications, ask them for a patching and maintenance plan. Make sure they've got a security operating center so they can monitor actual things that are going on. It's all right saying we've tested and we're dead secure, but that's right now. What happens tomorrow? What happens next week? In a month's time? Etc., etc. And again, ongoing monitoring. Have a way to monitor ongoing. Little plug for Mobius, seeing in they're allowing me to spend my time doing things like this. So we secure to Cyber Essentials Plus, PCI DSS. We run private circuits, private internet connectivity, separated IP VPNs. We use AI to do anomaly detection, monitoring, alerting when there's strange things happening on customers' equipment / data transfer. We monitor right at the edge. And specifically for the EV charging industry, We're compliant with the 303/645, which is RED and CAF, and we detect rogue and abnormal traffic across our network, therefore complying to the ongoing threat monitoring. And this is a tagline that my ex-MD said one time, and I thought it was brilliant, so I always put this on the end of my slide deck. So with that, if there are any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we will pick them up towards the end. And I will hand over to Steve. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Good afternoon, everyone. If you bear with me a second, I'll share my slides. Can you see that? Is it in presentation mode?
No, I couldn't get it to work there. Ah, there we go. It's on now.
Superb. Fine. Yes, can't see anyone, so forgive me, or just hopefully one of the other presenters will speak up if there's any issues with the slides moving forward. I'm Steve Sopp. I'm a commercial lead at Crown Commercial Service. I've been asked just to cover off some of the principles around the Procurement Act and to talk about what CCS is doing in the field or sector of VV infrastructure. We've got a few routes to market, and they are aligned with the new Procurement Act, so I will move on. So first, Procurement Act 2023. Hopefully you're familiar with it, you've heard of it, certainly your procurement teams will have heard of it. Despite its name, it actually came into force in February this year, February 2025. So the public sector is, I think it's fair to say, becoming familiar with the requirements of the Act. It's still relatively new. There isn't much case law out there, so some of the requirements under the Act haven't necessarily been fully tested, and there is a bit of a kind of risk-averse nature across the public sector, so people are applying some of the flexibilities, but perhaps not to the full extent that they could do. So some of the one of the reasons, or several reasons, for the new Act are about delivering value for money for the public sector, maximising public benefit, as we've got on the slide there. There is a big focus on transparency, integrity, and removing barriers for SMEs, opening up the market to SMEs, and they run throughout the provisions in the Act. Just again, a couple of key changes. It's badged as a simpler, more efficient procurement system. Under the old regime, you had a number of specific regulations and processes and procedures that were defined, whether that be negotiation or dialogue process or innovation partnership process. You've now got a much more simplified regime with what's called competitive flexible or competitive competition, effectively the ability for your commercial and legal teams to design their own procurement. I'll say a little bit more about that later on. There's a new central digital platform, Contracts Finder, or an improved version of Contracts Finder. All the information about awarded contracts and some of the contract management provisions will be on Contracts Finder going forward. So useful for buyers and suppliers as a kind of common source of information. I'll also talk a little bit about innovation in some of the following slides, and that links in with hopefully some of the slides that you'll have from the charge point providers. There's a big shift in terms of how you assess tenders as well. So we moved away from most economically advantageous tender, where there was a kind of emphasis on the price element, to most advantageous tender. And that shift is meant to encourage contracting authorities to think about the value that they get out of the procurement. And that again lines up with a desire to trial, test and procure innovative solutions, those solutions that may not be the cheapest on the market, but they can offer significant value. Social value comes into it as well. There's a focus on banning unacceptable risk suppliers. It's got in the slides there, but that's about having a central record of suppliers that are there's a sort of debarment list or a process for excluding suppliers that aren't deemed acceptable for public contracts. Big focus on paying prompt payment, with 90% of SME invoices paid within 5 days. I'll just move on. Final couple of slides on the new Act. Big focus on transparency. As I mentioned, there's a host of new notices or revised or updated notices that apply. There are some exemptions and exclusions if you're procuring through a framework agreement, but if you're going through an open tender, there are links at the end of this slide set to some guidance. Make sure you and your commercial teams are following the publicity notices that you need to put out, whether that's kind of pre-market engagement notice, whether it's a award notice, or whether it's an in-life or a variation notice. The other point that I'll pick up on in some of the next couple of slides is around open frameworks, and this is a new feature of the Procurement Act. Under the old regime, and this particularly affects CCS, our commercial framework agreements were opened up right at the start. Suppliers bid to join on them. If they were successful, great, they'd have a place on a framework agreement that could last between 4 or 6 years. But if you didn't manage to get on, it's quite a long time to wait until the framework expires and the new framework's launched. That process is addressed to a certain degree by the launch of open frameworks, and so an open framework can be reopened to onboard new suppliers periodically. So typically, one of the approaches I'll talk about in transport tech, the area that I work in, is the new open framework that we've got launching in November will have a series of short 2-year frameworks that are lumped together, blocked together. So they will run for at least 6 years with the option to extend for another 2 years. Effectively, if you're on for the first 2 years, you can decide whether you just want to shift across to the next 2-year framework, or you can reapply and extend the offer. One of the big advantages of open frameworks, particularly in a dynamic marketplace where you've got new transport technology solutions coming out, is that you can onboard those new suppliers that have developed market-ready solutions in that time frame. You don't have to wait until the full scope of the framework closes. I will also now move on to some of the electric vehicle infrastructure solutions that we offer at CCS. We've got 3 particular routes for people to support the public sector with their procurement of EV infrastructure. I mentioned we've got a new open framework that's launching in November. That's called Transport Technology. It's got an RM number, common ID number for CCS agreements. It's RM 6347. It's just come out of its standstill period at the moment. So we're just waiting to formally onboard the suppliers, get their returns, and then it would launch, expected to launch around the 5th of November. That has a dedicated electric vehicle infrastructure lot on it, so you can procure EV solutions through that. I'll talk about the details in a little bit as well, but you can't do concession contracts under the new Procurement Act under a framework. So that's one of the constraints that we've got. We've got our vehicle charging infrastructure solutions, DPS. I'm not going to talk about the DPS solution today. Hopefully you're familiar with it. It was set up under the old regime, under Public Contract Regs 2015. So it continues, and procurements and awards through that route continue to be subject to the old regime. It's intended to expire in April, or set to expire in April 2026. CCS has extended a number of DPS agreements under the old rules, and obviously we are looking at whether we need to apply that to the current DPS. So no decision yet, but there are opportunities to extend the DPS agreements that we have under the old rules out until, I think, February 2029 is the final date when all the old agreements need to expire. So there's an option for us to look at for our VSIS solutions. VSIS is a DPS agreement, so it's always open, so new suppliers can get on board at any time. That's one of the advantages of a DPS route, but there is a little bit more work for procurement bodies and contracting authorities. The final area that we support is with our template pack. So we've worked closely with OZEV and the Levi support body to develop set of draft templates, procurement documents that are free to use. They're intended to support open market concession contracts and aligned with the Levi documentation. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. In terms of our new Transport Tech agreement, as I mentioned, it's an open agreement. So it's a series of 3 two-year frameworks lumped together with the option to extend at the end of that. So potentially it could run for 8 years. We've got different routes that you can buy through that. We have award without competition for services. We've got a digital competition, a speedy route to market for goods and services. And we've got what's called competitive competition. So you can design your own procurement route. You can run multi-stage procurements. You can test, evaluate, do supplier visits, include negotiation and dialogue provisions. You can design that, but you have to be clear about that process up front. And we have provided a number of templates if you need to go down that route. No cap on number of suppliers. There are no limits on the contract value or the duration of the contract. And we've got a process which allows you to effectively down select the suppliers. It's called conditions of participation. So it's setting out up front what you expect from a capable supplier. So you don't have to do the full evaluation for the full list of suppliers that are on there. You could, for example, say we are looking for suppliers that have a particular accreditation because that's necessary to do the work. And only those suppliers with that accreditation would be subject to the full evaluation. Very quick overview of the capabilities that are under that agreement. You'll see we've got everything from professional services, parking, environmental monitoring, through to some of the more complex areas around network management, system integration. We've got a dedicated EV lot on there. So it's ideal for buyer-funded solutions, for fleet, staff, car park solutions, depot charging, etc. We, unfortunately, it's quite clear in the guidance that supports the new Procurement Act, we can't do concession contracts through that. So you've got a supplier funded route through our VSIS DPS, but the primary route I think all local authorities are using where CCS is concerned is through our template pack, and I'll say a little bit about that next. So EVI support service. We've developed a set of templates. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at them. You may, or your colleagues may have downloaded them, may even have used them in your procurements. They were finalised in January 2025. They took account of the Procurement Act. They were designed with the new Procurement Act in mind. The key documents are the ITT pack with a series of attachments and the concession contract terms and conditions with schedules. So the terms and conditions piece has probably taken the most work and involvement in terms of stakeholder engagement and feedback. It's a starting point. So it's by no means a case of you populating the details and submitting that as your sort of ITT, as your invitation for suppliers to bid. It will still require a fair bit of work from your legal and commercial teams, and you'll need to tailor it to your own requirements. But what it does is provide that consistency for the market. It's a starting point that has been aligned and discussed with Levi, so it's aligned with their Levi heads of terms. As I say, certainly not mandatory for local authorities to use, but we do encourage it because it provides for that consistent market approach. Just a couple more slides on the pack. You can see that the template pack is actually aligned with PA23. There are some examples here. So a concession contract defined in PA23 is referenced in there. You can see the various links through, whether it's determining value of a concession, whether it's the objectives of the procurement. These are provisions that are set out in the Procurement Act and they're reflected within the ITT. A couple of comments at the bottom. Concession contract threshold is set at £5,372,609, or at least it was. It is updated, I think, annually or twice, once every 2 years. Let's get that right. There's also a reference in the Procurement Act to regulated below threshold contracts, but that doesn't apply to a concession contract. And the final point there, absolutely vital to seek your internal legal and commercial advice before you do any activity, procurement activity. Again, a couple more links. PA23 notice regime. In our templates and in the ITT, we have drafting notes and guidance there that talks you through requirements of the Procurement Act and hopefully points you or signposts you to relevant guidance and advice. Conflict of interest regime. It's certainly covered in greater depth within the new Procurement Act, and there's guidance notes in the ITT pack that cover that off as well. The main structure of the ITT pack, we've loosely designed it around the approach that CCS takes with its procurement support. So where we do support on behalf of other public bodies, we have a particular approach, and that's reflected in our template pack. So it's split into 3 parts. Part 1 is about the procurement. Part 2 gives guidance on how to bid, on the qualification, technical and commercial questions, the assessment process, and then part 3 covers off rules of the process. It's the formal rules and governance of the procurement. And as I mentioned, I haven't detailed it here, but there are the terms and conditions that accompany that. There's a list of attachments that we've produced. We have some templates, some just placeholders with sort of names that you will need to use your own. This is, as I mentioned at the start, this is it's a starting point. It's not mandatory. You may have a slightly different way of doing things within your own organizations, and absolutely that's you can tweak and tailor this as much as you need to support your own requirements and process. I've covered off an example of an open procedure and the sort of flow that you would go through, and you can see some of the key sections there, right from the planned procurement notice and tender publication through clarification processes, the submission of tenders, the evaluation process, clarification process, right through to publication of award, a standstill period after the award notice is published, and then you're entering into contract. There are some requirements around publishing contract notices for contracts over a certain value. Check with your own teams. This is a generic procedure or process flow, so certainly encourage you to work with your own legal and commercial teams to check what actually applies to the procurement that you're undertaking and the route that you've chosen to do that. There have been some recent updates. We've got a new general terms or draft terms and conditions document that was published fairly recently, and that corrected some errors in the original document. It reflected on some market feedback from buyers and suppliers around the margin cap approach, insurance and definitions. And we've just completed some further work on the ITT template, and that will be uploaded hopefully within the next week or so. There are updates that reflect some clarifications and guidance to PA23 that was published. New procurement notices that have come out are reflected in there around social value. We've updated some terms and we've expanded on the guidance notes in that ITT template. So please alert your commercial teams to these documents. There is a link on the slides at the bottom there. If there are any questions, then don't hesitate to reach out to me or my colleagues. And there's just a link to some of the guidance that's available through Cabinet Office around Procurement Act 23, knowledge drops, video guides, etc., that can be quite useful. That's it from me. Our transport technology email address, so it's our kind of team email address, is on the slides here. If there are any questions about the slides, then again, please drop me an email. And I believe that's it from me. Shamala, I'll hand back to you initially.
Thank you very much, Steve. We will go now to Shane Rees from Chargy. Take it away, Shane.
Alrighty, thanks, Shamala. Right, let's do the seamless transition to screens, and that should be showing now. Brilliant. Right, so yeah, hi everyone. Just want to take you through something new from Chargy about how we are preparing ourselves to install more charge points in more places. So we've got some exciting technology to share with you, or Martin, who followed me, has some exciting technology to share with you, which is really focused on how do we do two things. One is speed up the EV transition, so that's kind of what Charge is all about, by helping everyone. So everyone who's going to be reliant on public charging infrastructure, because they don't have home charging, how can we make this transition fair and equitable for everyone? So I want to start off with by asking a quick question and asking you to think, what do you think the most important factor is for encouraging your residents who don't have driveways to make the EV switch? So there's lots of factors that might be going through your head right now. Is it the availability of cars? Is it the cost of those cars? What about the charging? Is it how easy is it to access? What does it cost? How reliable is it? All of those different things. Out of all of those, what do you think the most important factor is for encouraging your residents to make the switch? So obviously, it's we're going to focus on the charging aspects, and it's kind of this. So there's lots and lots of research about what holds people back from going electric. We can't control the cost of cars, but we can control how we can put the right sort of charging infrastructure in place for people, and what that's like to access and use. And if you have a driveway, people are very happy because they can charge really easily. That's within their control and often at a very low cost. But if you park in the street, I'm sort of one of those people who doesn't have a driveway, then you're completely reliant on the public charging infrastructure. And if it's not local, and I mean hyper-local, it can be a real barrier to you going electric. So convenience is the answer to that question. By far and away, out of all the different factors that draw people to EVs or push them away, the convenience of public charging, the charging that they're going to rely on for everyday charging, is the most important factor. So what does that, and that becomes obvious when you think, what does that look like? Because we often talk about 5-minute walks to a charge point. Well, when you think about that, you kind of need to multiply that every minute by 4, because it's a 4-stage journey or 4-step process to take your car to the charge point and get back home again, and then go and get it once it's finished charging, and either drive back home or continue on your journey or make your journey for the day. So so a 5-minute walk can often be like a 20-minute activity. And so how do we solve that problem? Well, not by asking our customers to run or our residents to run. That's not sort of the active travel that we really have in mind. It's by putting charge points closer to people. And there's some great news that the Committee on Climate Change has published some research that it commissioned last year, published the results earlier this year, looking at a range of policy factors that could speed up the adoption to EVs, because obviously they're concerned about emissions and its effect on climate change, transport being often the biggest category for that. And one of the policies they looked at was how do we create the charging infrastructure that encourages people to change. And they looked at 6 groups of people, people who had driveways and those who didn't, with 3 income bands, so low, medium, and high income households in both of those situations, 6 groups, and they dug into this is an average rate of transition. What does that look? Driveway and a home charge point, you will switch to EVs a lot faster than the average. And so this is the average of 3 groups, people in high, medium, low income households with driveways. And obviously not necessarily obviously, but the research showed that people with higher incomes are likely to switch to EVs faster within that group. And the adoption rate for people without driveways, again, this is the average of those 3 income bands for people without driveways, lags really far behind. So what difference would it make if we solved the inconvenience barrier? And I think one of the really interesting things that I found in this research was that low-income households with driveways will switch to EVs faster than wealthy households that park on street. So, we often think that EVs are expensive and wealthier households will switch to it faster. No, the ability to charge your car easily is what will make you switch faster. So what happens when you put charge points close to people's homes, like within a minute or two's walk? Well, that average for that group moves a lot further up, depending on income, but by between 2 and 7 years sooner. So if we think about an average of 3 to 4 years, you'll accelerate someone's decision to switch to an EV purely because the EVs are easier to live with. And what does that look like in terms of the carbon savings that you're looking to achieve for your council? Well, an average car emits about 1.5 tons of CO2 a year. So each one of those years is worth 1.5 tons of CO2 simply by putting charge points close to where those people live. So today we offer a range of technologies to install charge points in lots of different locations and streetscapes and car parks at different power speeds, depending on where we take the power from, and different styles of installations to suit different streetscapes. But even this wide range of technology doesn't answer every situation, because we face, as we pick the low-hanging fruit, as it were, we know that we're going to run into more location challenges. So how can we put charge points in those places where people really need them? So some of those challenges are around pavement widths. So some councils are becoming more ambitious in how much and how wide they want the pavements to be once a charge point is installed. There are other concerns around the visual impact of charging infrastructure and street clutter. If you think about conservation areas, how do we keep those looking more or less as they are today, and still allow people to drive modern cars by helping them charge on street? So we can solve these problems, but we need to consider in the process, how do we not run into other problems? So sometimes the solution to a narrow pavement might be a pavement build out. That creates resistance from people who don't have electric cars yet, because you're seen to be taking parking spaces away from people who drive petrol and diesel cars, or increasing parking congestion in places and making everyone's life harder. It also adds a lot of cost, and every pound that we invest in the charging infrastructure invariably feeds its way into the tariff. And very often our goal is to make charging as affordable as possible to bridge the gap between people who have driveways and those who don't. So yeah, how can we solve this problem in a way which doesn't alienate people and keeps costs manageable? So I'm going to hand over now to Martin, who's going to talk about the curb charger, which his company has developed, and we're going to be testing with Coventry City Council in up to 3 locations to see how it fits with different use cases. So one location on street where there aren't usable lampposts nearby, and the pavements are relatively narrow. How can we use the curb charger to provide on-street charging there? A taxi rank in a town centre, so taxis aren't on the go all the time. Could this be a way of enabling taxi drivers to top up while they're waiting for another fare or taking a break? And then sort of depots for staff charging and vans where space might be a real constraint. So yeah, that's it from me. Over to you, Martin.
Okay, Shane, thank you for that. I'll carry on, hopefully, the seamless transition and get everything working. Should be in presentation mode. Can you hopefully everyone can see it? Great. Okay, so I will get going. So yeah, great to meet everybody. I'm Martin Walters, Rheinmetall's Environmental Technology division, the Power Systems division. We look at industrial technologies, and I'm here to talk about the curb charger. So this presentation is really just 3 sections. Just talk about the challenge that we saw when we were thinking about EV infrastructure, the solution that's been brought to bear, and then the future in terms of the plans for this technology and thoughts moving forward. So the challenge. So the challenge really that was presented it's coming from actually the R&D team at Rheinmetall's Peerberg business unit. So they've got a long history of working with automotive players, a big OEM supplier, but they thought about the green transition and they started to develop a number of projects to support the EV transition. But outside of the vehicle, one of the projects they started to think about was actually, well, how can we help and bring sustainable charging and think about green mobility and charging infrastructure? So they started to look at this area. The team actually found a lot of concerns, a lot of challenges around space, resilience, safety, particularly around public charging and also on-street charging, people without driveways. So that became an area of interest in them. So they started investigating and thinking about that. As they continued to look at this area, they saw all sorts of innovation. I think Shane's previous slides showed lots of great innovation in this area, lamppost chargers. So there's all sorts of solutions that come to this space. But the team really thought the problem they were identifying was quite large. And they said, well, there's a need for new solutions and new innovation in this space. And as I started looking across Europe, there's some characteristics that came out, mainly across European cities, maybe because we've got old housing stock. But when they actually looked at the UK as well, they said, well, wow, 8 million households outside of London have no access to off-street parking. They will be reliant in the future, not now, but reliant in the future on public charging. So this is something we've got to try and do something about this. And at the moment, you know, when they started looking at these households, 90% of these households have more than a 5-minute walk to a public charger. So the pain point that Shane previously was alluding to, that convenience, well, that's clearly a key issue. So the team actually felt confident. They thought they understood the requirements of this new infrastructure. It needed to save space, it needed to be robust, scalable, convenient, and simple. So what did they do? So you probably know what I'm going to say. They reimagined the curb. They thought about actually putting the EV infrastructure inside the curb and have come up with a new technology, a product that we're pretty proud of called the curb charger. So this really, that idea of reimagining the existing infrastructure was a key driver here. Not adding anything new to the street furniture was a key goal. Something that was scalable, something that you actually can put across every city, every country, and saying, right, this is a technology that could be really useful in situations where space and convenience are a challenge. It can support fast charging up to 22 kilowatts, very reliable, and actually have a bunch of connectivity there. So 4G modem, there's Ethernet, and there's also an energy meter. So there's a whole bunch of technology that will be there in the street. And it's very simple to use. So you just connect the charger on the CPO network. You unlock the charger because that's important. The flap opens. You then simply plug in. You start your charging session. So with this solution, really, there's no reduction in pavement space. Cables, no cables across the pavement. There's no change into the character of the street. And actually, it's located close to residents. That convenience, that proximity is key here. So I'll just dive into a little bit more about what this technology is. It's really a 2-part system. First, we have something called a hollow curb, which is the outer structure. And then we have the electronic module, which is the kind of the top plate that feeds in with all the electronics. Now, actually, it's designed this way because actually there's a vision where sometimes you may put the hollow curbs in with a secure plate in, because actually while you're doing the development of the site or changing the street, actually you've got the ability to put technology in. And then later, as you see an uptick in terms of charging demand, you can drop a module in, and you can do that in less than 30 minutes. So it's really been thought about in terms of design and future design. So the hollow curb, a 65 kilogram engineered structure. It's got a stainless steel insert and back plates for that extra strength. There are ducts underneath where the electrical supply comes in, also Ethernet cables come in, but also space for any kind of drainage or water retention or way to get rid of water. So if you look, actually, you'll see here just a simple installation. So you clearly have to work with local authorities, authorised street people, just to put the units in on the street. But then once the units are in, we either do one or two things. We'll put a structured top plate in with safety screws just to ensure that actually the unit is secure, the site's secure. But if the site is deemed to be turned into electric module and go live straight away, we'll fit a module in at the same time. So what does the electric module look like? Well, it's something like this. It's quite a robust piece of equipment, but with a lot of technology on to get performance in all sorts of conditions. So there's temperature sensors, water level sensors, locking mechanisms, all sorts of things just to ensure the resilience and performance of the street for a long period of time. And how would you fit the module? Well, this installation, once the electrical work is done, is pretty straightforward. You take the cover plate off, you then just drop an electronic module in, connect the power, do a bit of software configuration, place it back in, safety screws go on, and then some secure caps, all within 30 minutes. So actually, it really lends itself to either advanced kind of installation, or if you're responding to an uptick in demand, actually dropping one of these and then supporting the demand from local communities. And we're seeing, actually, as this is deployed in Germany and other locations, partners have already taken the lead to integrate these curb units into mapping and charge points. So this one is just in Dusseldorf. There's a What3 Words location. You can, I think it's touchy.sounding.booth is the 3 by 3 meter location of the unit. So easily found on the mapping, and customers can just drive up and start charging. So just touch on resilience here. So another feature of the unit is actually there's a temperature sensor that we talked about earlier on. As soon as the temperature gets towards freezing, the unit actually heats up. And this is to prevent the buildup of snow and ice, and just to make sure that the unit maintains its availability. The unit's IP68 rated, so high level of water and dust resilience is expected from the unit. So even if there's like flooding in the street, we expect the unit to perform. Also, impact testing, a lot of work has been done in terms of structural strength. So a lot of impacting drive over testing has been done with cars and trucks, and it's been tested up to 10 tons. So here, really, what we believe we have is a contribution to that. The problem that we talked about earlier on, we believe there's a new, smart city infrastructure asset that we'll be delighted to deploy across Europe. It saves space, it's robust, it's scalable, definitely accessible, and very simple to use. And hopefully will be in the ground for a long period of time. So just looking to the future, well, these units actually have already been in the ground for over 12 months in Germany and performed very, very well. So much so it's given the business the confidence to scale this technology across Europe. It's already scaling across Germany now, and the results were really quite interesting. We will touch on them in a moment. But yeah, the ambition now is to grow this, scale it in the UK as well, and really grow the technology base. So pilots were done in Dusseldorf, Cologne, and Növnik, but here is just from feedback from we talked to 100 participants in Cologne, and we got some really interesting feedback. And when asked about, what is the importance to you when it comes to EV charging solution, what's the most important point? and we didn't know what Shane was going to say previously, funny enough. But they came out, and it's proximity. That proximity convenience question and simple ease of use were the key things that respondents to the survey and the pilot study came back with. And yeah, this pilot ran for 12 months. Got a lot of great feedback, but yeah, that proximity, the ability to reduce the walk time from minutes to seconds, in fact, had been really important to a lot of the customers. And overall, the customers, when they're comparing the charger against conventional solutions, really ranked the charger quite high. One area, though, that they did not rank the charger as highly was visibility and discoverability. Actually, that was expected because this is integrated quite well into the streetscape. It's not as easy to see, but with correct signage and supporting bays, we believe actually it'll become a great solution moving forward. But overall, very positive feedback, extensive advantages in terms of resilience, resistance from vandalism, and so yeah, more than happy to deploy this technology moving forward. And so yeah, we come to the UK, where we've got a number of sites where we're deploying this technology, and hopefully the first will be at Coventry. As you say, the 3 use cases are showing a street without a taxi rank and actually a vehicle depot. So we're really interested in the proximity, the durability, and the reliability as the key things that we're looking for. Technology is very robust, resilient, and perform. But really don't believe us. We want to show you and demonstrate via the pilot studies that this is something that can be relied upon and something that's going to scale across the UK. So if you're interested in this, yeah, more than happy to hear from you. So my email's here, and this will be shared after the meeting. Yeah, please feel free to reach out and yeah, stay in touch.
Thank you so much, Martin. So what I will do now is again pass this session on to John. We are now going to look at a Q&A panel session. So if the panelists or presenters can come on the screen, that'll be great. Okay, John.
Hello, I'm back. So we've had a few questions come up in the chat, which is great. So thank you for that. If anyone's got any whilst we're going, feel free to add them in there as well. There were a couple of points raised, not so much questions, just points raised. So just thought I'd read them out, just for those who haven't seen the Q&A section. So someone suggested that they'd not even thought about cybersecurity when it comes to EV charging infrastructure. So excellent, that's my job done. Thank you very much. And one for you, Shane, walk time multiplied by 4. Brilliant, not thought about that. That's even worse, or should be more considered for people with mobility challenges as well. So 4 minutes for me might be 10 minutes for somebody else. So actually, yes, that's a very good point. So they were the statements. So I think I'll jump into some questions. So I have a question for Steve. So this is from me. So as a supplier, you mentioned about quality and price being 2 considerations. Now, obviously, I work for a quality company, but makes us expensive. So I was interested in to see how that weighting's sort of created. What sort of weighting are we looking at? Is it a 50-50 split, or is it? I know it's a hard question to answer, but I just thought I'd ask anyway as a supplier.
Yeah, it's down to the buying organisation. I think the Procurement Act has there is a shift from what was deemed to be most economically advantageous tender, and the emphasis there was on economic, and there was quite a sizable focus on the price being delivered, and that I guess the kind of vision under the new act is actually you need to be thinking about these things in terms of the most advantageous tender. So I think the steer is start considering what benefits, what whole life benefits, what social value, that quality component that comes out of it. And it really does depend on what you're procuring. Obviously, for this group in particular, many authorities are looking at supplier funded concession type contracts. So there is some guidance through Nevis, Levi portal, etc., in terms of how the types of questions that you can ask to try and identify the most advantageous tender in this particular circumstance, because you're not necessarily looking at price per se. You're looking at how many charge points are delivered. You're looking at the overarching quality that you'll get. But the general principle, I think, it does apply. A fundamental shift from focusing purely on sort of price and what's being delivered to one that encourages people to consider the wider context of the solution that's being delivered.
Excellent, thank you. So Rachel's asked quite a few questions. So again, for you, Steve, I'm afraid. So SMEs are being encouraged. They were using EV Box and they've just ceased trading. So is going with a larger CPO better, so they're less likely to go under? And are they not reducing risk by going larger?
I'm not going to give any specific advice on that point. I think it's obviously the public sector has a focus on how can it reduce risks. I think what we've done is worked with suppliers, and actually if you're looking at on-street charging providers, there are plenty of smaller capable organizations in the marketplace, many of which are quite innovative and flexible, and they can sometimes react more quickly than perhaps some of the more traditional players in the marketplace. Not a generalization there. I think there's innovation in large players as well that is kind of worth noting. So I think it's more about what measures have you got in place. So you can look at mitigations if you're looking at working with a supplier for a long term. What provisions are appropriate for a supplier to put in place to mitigate those risks? So it does really require you to work with your commercial and legal teams to think about the risks that might occur in a procurement, and then to be open about how you can mitigate them. I think one of the advantages of the new Act is it does encourage that sort of pre-procurement, pre-market engagement activity. So you can go out there and you can speak to the supply chain about some of the concerns that you have or any risks you've identified before you launch into your procurements, and you can hear directly from them in terms of how best they can mitigate it. There was a bit of a discussion around parent company guarantees, and I'm in this space, and I'm aware that some charge point operators, because of the nature of the company arrangement or the funding arrangement, that may not be possible for all of them. There are other solutions that you can look at, and there is guidance out there. There are procurement playbooks that provide some guidance and advice on how you might mitigate risk, what alternatives you might consider. So my suggestion would be look at the whole picture, be open to having those discussions with the supply chain around how they can mitigate risks, and look at what you're procuring. Maybe, one of the, this is a more general point, not necessarily directed specifically at charge point operators, but look at lotting up procurements. So you're giving that opportunity for some of those smaller people to bid and deploy and deliver quickly for an opportunity, rather than just lump it all in and put a large procurement out there to the marketplace. So there's certainly opportunities to do that. The whole focus again of the Act, I talked about the shift to advantageous tender, but there's also a shift to removing barriers from SMEs. Think about what you can do to remove those barriers to encourage more bidders to bid for your opportunity. That's got to be a good thing. If you put a bid out there and you get one or two respondees, you're not encouraging competition, you're not being offered the full scope. I can see Shane's got his hand up as well, so I'm sure
yes.
Shane's got
we're very
comments on that point.
I'm conscious of time as well, so.
Okay, I'll keep it really short. Those are all really good points. I think there's a couple of things that councils can do to protect themselves from that risk. One of those is sort of what Steve said. If you're a really big council, you can consider lotting to break up your region into smaller lots or lot by technology. That reduces your risk and allows more CPOs to bid for those opportunities. It might look like a bit more work, but in the long term, that might be a good way to do it. The other is how you evaluate the CPOs that are bidding for your business. So turnover is a terrible metric for that. It's not a guarantee of financial stability. I think if you remember Carillion, they demonstrated that very ably when they went bust. I think it's mostly around understanding the commercial model of the CPO. So ask detailed questions about, especially if you have a PQQ or a PSQ followed by a full ITT. Ask questions at that stage, in the PQQ stage. What's your commercial model? How do you go about evaluating risk? And then within your ITT, ask what is the commercial model, the financial model that supports your investment in our region, and what are you going to do if market conditions work out differently to your best case scenario? The CPO should be accounting for if everything goes great, this is what we'll do. If everything goes if the market turns against us, this is how we'll manage those risks, but we expect the reality to be somewhere in the middle, and this is our most likely case of investment. So there's lots of things you can do. And mostly that's asking questions and encouraging dialogue and not taking single metrics of a company's financial stability. One more thing, there was a great webinar hosted by Steer a couple of months ago. I'll try and find the link and post it, on how investors see the CPO market and where they see sort of risk. Really enlightening. Far too much to go into. I'll look for the link and try and post it to Shamala to share with the group.
Thank you so much. Sorry, John, we are out of time. We're actually 2 minutes over. So I think any other questions, maybe we could have a look at it and post it on the TTF website.
Shamala,
yes,
there is one question asked to me. They talked about accessibility in the chat. So there's a plugin support for our unit as well, and a couple of people asked about that. Okay, so we do have a plugin support, and it's been tested with accessibility. Okay, that
is what I was going to say. That there are a couple of questions, but we can't continue anymore. we are out of time now. But thank you so much for everybody who has joined this webinar. The recordings will be available on the TTF website along with the presentations. So thank you very much.